Welcome to another Lean Six Sigma training module from Lean Six Sigma Toolbox. I'm Cedro Toro, and today we're going to go through how to calculate savings from your Lean Six Sigma projects and publish those savings throughout the organization. Taiichi Ohno, one of the founding fathers of the Toyota production system, said that costs don't exist to be calculated, they exist to be reduced. So the first thing we need to understand is, how do we measure success in our company or our department? We can measure success by reducing the amount of costs we have, making more money for the company, reducing the amount of time we spend on things, increasing customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction. We can also measure things like safety improvements and making the work life easier for our team. By understanding how you measure success, you'll be able to determine the best way to calculate the savings from your projects. Every project we work on should be able to benefit the company, but most companies look at benefits in terms of one thing: profits. And profits only come from two areas. Either you increase revenue while maintaining costs, or you maintain revenue while lowering costs. So which of these are we going to do? Well, if we're going to increase revenue, we're going to have to take our existing customers and we're going to have to grow them. In other words, increase the deal size with them. Or we're going to have to win new customers and grow the volume of customers that we have. Now, Lean and Six Sigma can improve this area of the business, but for the most part, Lean and Six Sigma are working on cost reduction. So we're working on reducing the amount of time things take, or the amount of materials or labor something takes. So when you look at the cost structure, you really can look at these three categories. Can we reduce the amount of materials we're buying, use less inventory, or improve the quality of the materials so we're not scrapping as much? Can we improve our labor and equipment efficiency? In other words, getting the same amount of work done with less human capital, less human resources applied to that job. And then the third one would be safety. This is a cost savings just from the fact that you're, number one, keeping your employees safe, and number two, you're actually lowering your cost to cover insurance claims, cost to handle safety incidents. All of those can add up really, really quickly. And of course, the real reason we want to do this is just because we want to keep our employees safe. In the continuous improvement space, we'll often talk about hard savings and soft savings. The real difference here is that hard savings will show up on the bottom line of like your balance sheet or your financial statements. The soft savings are things that won't necessarily show up on the balance sheet, but they're really good for the company. Things like increasing capacity and avoiding costs. Those are things that are soft savings. We never want to lay anyone off when we improve our labor cost per unit. So we'll talk about that a little bit more here in the next slides. But it's important to note that soft savings, a lot of times people think that if we're working in a lean environment that we're trying to cut back on our workforce. That's absolutely not the case. Okay, so let's dive into the labor efficiencies. If we improve our labor cost per unit, in other words, we can take care of more patients with the same number of nurses, or we can produce more widgets with the same number of operators. The first thing we want to do is implement a no layoff policy. This means that our employees are going to feel safe at work. They understand that we're not trying to cut back on headcount. This is going to really free people up to just relax and find process improvements, and they're going to speak up. They're going to tell the management all the problems that they have and say, look, we need to fix these. We need to eliminate this waste, because if we do, it's going to make us more efficient. Employees that are worried about losing their job or wondering who's going to get laid off are not going to be vocal. They're not going to speak up. So we definitely want to implement the no layoff policy first. Next, if we can use the employees' extra bandwidth to improve other processes or have them work on 5S projects or do research and development, do new process improvement design. There's a lot of things that employees that have extra bandwidth can work on now that we've improved the process. Finally, if we are overstaffed, if we have improved the process to such a degree that there's people that just don't have a lot to do, we can wait until our business grows and use those people to work on that additional business that's coming in the door. Or we can simply let natural attrition take its place, and when people leave the company to go elsewhere, we just don't backfill those positions. Again, we never are going to let people go as a result of becoming more efficient. So let's dive into what hard savings and soft savings mean. Hard savings are dollars that show up on your financial statements, and your CFO is going to be the one who really decides is this allowed to be hard savings or not? So you can only get hard savings two ways. Number one, by firing someone, and we already talked, we're not going to do that. We're not going to lay anybody off. Number two, we can reduce material costs. So we can reduce the amount of scrap that we have, the amount of materials that we're purchasing, the amount of supplies that we need to do our job, and we can actually reduce the amount of inventory that we have on hand. When we do this, however, we have to watch out for our current accounting methods. At least in the United States and most of the world, the way we do accounting is actually directly opposed to lean manufacturing practices. The reason for that is that we take all of our on-hand inventory and we count it as an asset, so it's valuable and it makes us look good and actually helps us cover our costs. Our overhead costs can be absorbed by the amount of inventory we have, and for this reason, it's really difficult to lower inventory levels for some companies. So what you have to do is you have to adopt lean accounting practices, which is a really big shift for most companies. And we're not going to go into that today, but if you want to go online and Google lean accounting, you can find some great books and articles on what that means. What it means is we're going to change the way we value our assets, change the way we value our inventory, and put more focus on throughput and actually delivering to the customers as opposed to holding inventory. Again, watch out for that. When you start to drive inventory levels down, you're going to have a little bit of an uphill battle, and you're going to have to work with your accounting team. So identify them as a stakeholder early on so that you can get them engaged and get their feedback and work together toward finding accounting practices that are going to work for your company. All right, let's dive into soft savings. I'm not sure if you noticed, but that hard savings list was really short. You can fire people or you can lower materials. That's not a big list. So where are all the savings from Lean Six Sigma coming from? Well, they're coming from these soft savings. Soft savings are just improvements where you're avoiding spending money or you're getting more efficient. Your cost per unit or cost per patient is going down. So some examples: you increased your throughput by 30%. You can now produce 30% more parts with the same workforce. Hard savings or soft savings? Well, you avoided having to hire all the extra people that you would normally take to get that 30% increase in throughput. However, since you never did hire them in the first place, a lot of companies will say, look, that's just a soft savings. Our labor cost per unit did go down, however, so you can count that as a hard savings. It really just depends on what your company decides to do. What if you reduce the amount of inspection by 50%? Well, again, you're spending less labor to get the same amount of product out. So you're more efficient. You can count it as hard savings or soft savings. Most companies will call it a soft savings. Okay, what if you made your employees happier or you increased your customer satisfaction? Those are fantastic projects and they really are valuable to your company. But how are you going to quantify that? Are your customers going to increase their order size? Maybe that would be a revenue increase, which would be a hard savings or a hard increase. But if your employees are happier and they're doing better work, we all agree that that would be an amazing benefit to the company. But it's difficult to quantify. So you can put a number on your employee satisfaction score, for example, and say our employee satisfaction score going from a 4.0 to a 4.5 is worth $1 million to our company. If you guys agree on that, fantastic. You can use those numbers. Otherwise, just count it as a soft savings and move on, and know that those projects are just as valuable, maybe even more valuable than a lot of the other projects that we work on. Can you count it? Yes, you can count all of it. So no matter what your Lean Six Sigma project is, whether it's hard savings or soft savings, you can count it. And I would strongly encourage you to count it. You should be using a tool like KPI Fire or a spreadsheet or anything that can help you show how much money you're saving on every single project that you do. The third category that we're talking about is top-line value. And just like the third area of project savings or benefit is top-line value, boy, these projects are fantastic. If you can find a way to analyze your market using market data and figure out where you should be promoting your products or where you should be enlarging your scope of distribution, you can really drive top-line sales. and revenue. And those projects will lead to an enormous amount of growth in your company and further backing of your continuous improvement program. The people that are running Lean Six Sigma projects are uniquely qualified to analyze data, which can tell you which products are working, which markets are working, which marketing techniques are more effective. A lot of times the marketing department will have great data on what they're doing, A/B testing different, campaigns, website, landing pages. If you can analyze some of that data for them and really give them great answers on what to do next, you can drive that top line value. So don't shy away from these projects. Go meet with your sales team. Go meet with your outbound logistics and distribution teams. Go see if you can get a hold of some data and do some analysis here and get some top line revenue projects in place. Okay, let's go through the 6 steps of calculating your project savings. I'm going to go through 2 scenarios, one for nursing and one for a factory. If we improve the process flow in our department in the hospital, that would be one improvement. If we improved yields on the factory floor, that would be a second improvement. Next, we're going to quantify each improvement. So how much did we improve the flow? Well, we improved the flow by 300 feet of walking each day for every nurse. That's fantastic. How much did we improve the yield? Well, we went from 85 to 93%. That's an 8% increase. Once we know that, step 3 is turning those numbers into dollars. So 300 feet per day for 12 nurses is about $90 a day. And that's assuming a standard rate of $45 an hour for a nurse. The yield improvement, 8% yield at $23 per unit, is $1.84 saved per unit. In other words, we're going to reduce the amount of scrap we have by $1.84, which is what we were spending in scrap on every unit we produced. Step number 4 is to annualize the savings. Most Lean Six Sigma projects, you can count the savings for 12 months. After that, whatever improvements you've made are considered the new standard, the new baseline, and any improvements you make on top of that are counted, but anything from 12 months on, you don't get a count anymore. So $90 per day at 250 days a year for the nursing staff, that's $22,500 in labor saved per year. Now, in reality, you probably work 365 days a year, so you'd probably multiply that by 365. But you just saved, a quarter of an employee with that little improvement there. And that's just one nurse, right? If you multiply that across multiple departments or teams, that could be a lot more. The 8% yield improvement at $23 a unit, assuming we make about 358,000 units a year, that totals $658,000, which is an enormous amount of money. And these are relatively similar examples to projects that I've actually worked on. So these are real numbers and real savings that you can get from your projects. Step number 5, really important, go showcase all of your savings to management. Get out there and take your management team on a Gemba walk, show them the changes that you've made, show them how it's going to save the company money and make life better for the employees and the patients or the customers. This is really going to help management understand what you've accomplished and add some fuel to your fire to get more momentum behind your continuous improvement program. In the final step, you want to showcase your savings to your team. So make sure everyone on your team also goes to the Gemba, understands the changes that were made. They should already, hopefully, after you completed your project, but also get the team together to throw a big party and recognize everyone for the good work that they've done. This verbal recognition is important. Also, I'm a big believer in giving out gift cards. I've seen, doctors making 6 figures who will, fight over a gift card because it's a symbol of the fact that they accomplished something. So don't be afraid to throw out some swag, give people some free stuff, and congratulate people in person and just really celebrate those wins so that people will be excited to do the next Lean Six Sigma project. All right, let's go through some examples together. This example is from a call center. You have a manager overseeing, 20 agents that are on the phones, spending a lot of time having to answer their questions, things that they can't answer for the customers on the phone. They'd like to minimize that. So we have 10 hours a week of handling flagged calls. These are calls where the agent on the phone needs help. If it's $20 per hour as a burden wage for the agents on the phone, they could potentially save 10 hours a week times $20 an hour, which is $200 a week. And that's just avoiding time that they are spending answering questions for the agents. If you do that 48 weeks a year, that's about $9,600 in annual cost avoidance. Now, what does that mean? Are you actually going to save that money? Probably not. What you are going to do is free up that much money in terms of time for the manager. So the manager can spend that $10,000 a year worth of time doing more value-added things like improving the methods for answering the calls, or improving the documentation, or improving the software, or any number of things that they find more valuable. Example number 2, this is an inventory reduction at a mattress factory where we took the amount of inventory we were holding, which was about $2 million, and reduced that to $1 million. So cut it in half, basically. So if you look at an 18% WACC, which is your weighted average cost of capital, that's the amount of interest you're spending to borrow the money that you have tied up in your inventory. Now, for right now, 2020, this is probably a lower interest rate than that. However, this is also opportunity cost. That's money you could be spending to go earn an 18% return on your money if you were investing that money elsewhere outside of just your inventory. So we reduce the amount of time we also spend moving, managing, and counting the excess inventory by 10 hours a week. So that's an additional cost savings there. So if we look at the soft savings of 48 hours or 48 weeks times 10 hours a week times 2 employees at $15 an hour, that's $14,000 in soft savings for just saving people's time. And then we also have the $18,000 in reduced expenses from tying up our capital, for a total of $32,400. Example 3, this is reducing changeover time on some equipment at a fish food factory. We have extruders that have different ends that you put on that the extrusion goes through. It changes the size of the pellets for the fish food. And those take some time to change over, as much as an hour to do a changeover, and you might do that 5 times a day. So if we can reduce that down to 15 minutes, we can save 45 minutes on every changeover 5 times a day, and that's 20 pounds per minute that we're producing, so that's 4,500 extra pounds of material that we actually can create. The cost of the line per hour is about $400. And that's just your line time, your labor and equipment. So if we look at our available minutes beforehand, we do some math here. We're working 24 hours a day, and you're multiplying that by, converting that to minutes. That's how many available minutes you had per day before, because you're subtracting out your 5 60-minute changeovers. That's 11,000 or 1,140 minutes. Then after you made the change and reduced your changeover time, you only have 5 15-minute changeovers, so your available time is now 1,365 minutes. That means your cost per pound before went from 42 cents a pound down to 35 cents a pound. Your annualized savings with 8 million pounds a year is $574,218. That's also an increase in revenue by selling those pounds of $2.5 million, $2,463,000. So if you add that up, you get a $3,037,968 savings from this changeover reduction project, which is amazing. Okay, example number 4, reducing the length of stay in a hospital emergency department. So one of the hospitals I was working with had about 150 minutes, it was actually closer to 180 minutes of a length of stay for the average patient coming through. If we could reduce that down to 110 minutes, which we did, we could potentially go from having 48 patients per day, which was our capacity before, and bump that up to 65 patients a day, which is a 35% improvement. If you look at that from a revenue standpoint, and you say, $500 per patient. Now, this isn't the actual value of a patient, but just for argument's sake, you could say those extra 17 patients we can see every single day, 365 days a year, is a $3.1 million increase in the amount of revenue for the hospital. But the real benefit here was patient satisfaction. We had, patients that needed to be seen and didn't have beds for them. And also the stress on the nursing and doctors, the nursing staff, because they were constantly, trying to figure out, how do we handle this patient load? Do we need to build a bigger hospital? And turns out they really didn't. They just needed to increase their throughput. Example number 5. Here we are helping the MedSurg nursing team have a more relaxed time when they're not at work. So they're not getting as many pings on their phone and text messages asking them to come into work, and just making their life a little bit better. So what we did is we measured the number of times that the nurses were actually asked to come into work when they weren't on shift. And it turns out the nurses were getting hit with texts, phone calls, emails about 105 times a week from their own department as well as other departments looking for employees to cover shifts. So they couldn't really relax on their days off, and of course they felt guilty if they didn't come in and respond. So some nurses would come in and volunteer a lot and some wouldn't. So we implemented an improved call schedule process where the nurses would get one call per week if they were on the schedule to cover that shift in an emergency. And if they weren't on the schedule to cover that shift in an emergency, they wouldn't get any of the calls or texts to cover a shift. So their number of pings per week went down to 7, which was a 93% reduction. So the employees were able to relax when they weren't at work instead of constantly feeling like they were at work even on their days off. You'll notice there's no real hard savings here. There's no soft savings even. This is just an employee satisfaction project. So we increased their satisfaction, and all the employees agreed. All the nurses said, wow, this is a lot better than constantly having to respond to texts and phone calls. Okay, so that's the end of our examples. We're going to talk a little bit now about how to show the return on investment and payback period. These are two techniques for showing your company how much benefit and value they're getting out of your Lean Six Sigma projects. The return on investment is not as useful, I've found, because it often has very large percentages, which people don't find believable. So a payback period, in my opinion, is a much better method of showing savings, but I'll show you both. So return on investment is a simple calculation. You take the amount of money the project saved, you subtract the amount of money you put into the project, and you divide that by the amount of money you put into the project to get a percentage return on investment. Now, the money you put into the project is typically the cost of your employees that spent time on the project, you, the project leader, and there can also be material costs for some projects to buy things. Like if you're putting a visual board in place, you might have some costs associated with that, or 5S materials, things like that. But for the most part, your projects are going to be pretty low cost from a material standpoint. It's just a labor investment, and you should be able to get at least a one-to-one return on investment, or 100%. Now, the payback period is a little different. What you do there is you say, how much money did this project cost? And how much money are we saving every week as a result of this project? And then you just divide those two numbers. So if you're saving $5,000 a week and you spent $20,000 in labor, well, it's only going to take you 4 weeks to get the return on that investment. So a 4-week payback period is awesome. Type of language is something everybody understands. You say, look, it's going to take us 6 months to pay back this project, and then we're going to get 6 more months of value out of it. The final way to show your project savings is just to show the raw dollars over 12 months. So in this example, we've got the project investment of $20,000. Now the value of this project over the course of a year is $120,000. And that might be enough for your company just to say, look, we're saving $120,000 per year. Of course, there's the 500% return on investment and the 11-week payback period. But at the end of the day, if you're saving $120,000 a year and you didn't spend more than that to get there, then you're doing great things for the company. Which brings me to my last point. If you're going to have a program across your entire company where you're doing multiple projects and multiple departments, you're going to want to have a way to track that and have a methodology for that. So in this example, we have 10 different departments. We did 8 projects in each of the departments throughout the year. They had an average savings of $10,000 and a forecasted savings of $800,000 for the year. Then we can start tracking our savings to date. So it's Q1 of 2020. We've got $120,000 so far through 14 projects that we've completed. And if you can score this month by month, then you can keep track of the benefit your Lean Six Sigma projects are having on the organization. Now, if you're going to track projects throughout your organization, there's 2 ways to do it. You can use a spreadsheet to keep track of what your savings were and how many projects you completed in every department. If you have fewer than 10 projects, that's probably okay. You can manage that easily with a spreadsheet. If you start to grow your Lean Six Sigma culture and your continuous improvement culture across the organization, where you've got multiple teams and people working on projects all the time, it's better to use a system like KPI Fire where everyone can log in and upload their projects and put in the amount of money they're saving. And then the software automatically tracks and shows you what the savings and the benefits are for your projects throughout the year. So depending on how big your organization is, you may or may not want a software solution to help you out with that. That's the end of this module on calculating project savings from your Lean Six Sigma projects. If you have questions or comments, please reach out to me. You can see my email and phone number there below. I'm happy to help, and I'm looking forward to seeing your success in your Lean Six Sigma projects and creating a culture of continuous improvement in your organization.